So,
Hello.
hi, my name is Justin. I've been a DM for 5th edition D&D. This sounds like DM's Anonymous right here. For about a year and a half. So, some of you might have more experience than me.
Hi, my name is Eric. I've been a dungeon master and player with D&D 5th edition since its relative inception, basically September of 2014 was like kind of whenever I got started into it. I've been a dungeon master since March of 2015. So just to give you some timelines on that. I currently run Out of the Abyss. I've been running it for a little over a year and a half now. Justin is actually one of my players, and so is this gentleman down here. And then I also play as a character in Justin's campaign, Curse of Strahd.
I also write really weird one-shots.
Yeah, the one-shots are fun.
Yeah. They're NSFW.
Nostromos. I don't know, I forget what it fully stands for.
Nostromo's Secret Frostford Workshop. That's one where I worked backwards from the acronym. This is our DM workshop panel. I guess I'll get started by asking, how many people in the room have DM'd for any sort of tabletop RPG, or GM'd? Okay,
Excellent.
okay.
Fair bit, yeah, nice.
Cool. I think the intent of this discussion is really to share experiences and concrete tools or learning experiences that we've had over our respective careers as GMs for various tabletop RPGs. I think those skills translate very naturally, but as Eric and I mentioned, the main system that we'll be focusing on is Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. The system that is seeing a tremendous amount of growth in the tabletop RPG market. And I think, yeah, so I'll get a conversation starter going.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've always found, or that I've struggled with over the last about a year and a half, is the amount of preparation that I need to do in order to be comfortable going into a session. So this can really vary in terms of what I'm preparing. I can go through a dungeon room by room. I can prepare the major NPC encounters and have lines of dialogue written for each NPC. But really what I'm trying to capture here is not so much exactly what is going to happen, but also, but more so focusing on the intent of any specific session, the intent of any specific encounter with an NPC, the motivations that they have, the motivations that I have in presenting that sort of encounter. So to that extent, I like to be able to know what people's motivations are, what they're trying to get out of an encounter with the NPC, or with the player characters rather, and what I, as a DM, want to present to my characters, what I want them to get out of an encounter, whether it be social or in a dungeon.
Yeah, to piggyback what Justin is saying, I think he and I have different kind of philosophies when it comes to dungeon mastering, or at least preparation time. Both of us take the time to read through the module or read through our materials, source material, whatever it may be. If you're running a homebrew and you're drawing on various components from novels or from comics or from a movie that you're drawing inspiration from, whatever it may be, we collect that information, we write it down, we sort of build a skeletal structure, but then Justin conveys more of an emotional side of things, and he really dives into the character development, whereas I'm more focused on driving plot and moving the story forward. So I tend, and this is just my personal take on things, I tend to sacrifice character development in light of driving the plot forward, because ultimately the characters are out to do a goal. And while learning what that 5-page single-spaced 10-point font backstory looks like to your barbarian, that really has ultimately very little bearing on the movement of the story. So when I prepare a situation, or when I prepare for a session, I'm looking again to the NPCs, the specific encounters, what I'm looking for out of that session, but I'm looking more toward plot driving, moving the story forward. Whereas I think Justin's trying to, just from my experiences as a player in his campaigns, he tends to focus more on the emotion. What can you pull out of the characters? What can you get from them, both as motivations and as their own way to move the plot forward on their own without my prompting?
Yeah, I think that speaks to a good point. Like, what do people come to the table for? Do they come to the table to go through points A, B, and C and do something epic at the end of campaign? Or do they do something to, do they come to the table with a character in mind that in some aspect is a reflection of themselves? Do they come to the table seeking that sort of introspective character development and exploration of this character that in some ways, shape or form represents what they do and how they would interact with very extreme circumstances? So
yeah, I tend to agree. I think you really that brings one of the points that I wanted to make to this session is like session 0 and setting expectations.
Yeah.
I'm sure Justin will touch on this too as well, and he'll expound upon his ideas. But a session 0, what does that mean? What does that look like? It's the prime before session 1, before you actually dive into the campaign. So
it's tough for input.
yeah, that's a good point.
What makes a good session 0 to y'all? I think we'd
What
like
does that
this to be
mean to
back
you?
and forth. Yeah.
What does that? We want this more of as a discussion rather than us just talking to you for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
That seems really egotistical of us and very dungeon mastery.
Oh, I'm going
with
to
our
peter out
extreme
in about
exposition.
10 minutes if y'all don't like help us out here.
I'll sit in silence and stare at you. Trust me.
Are we gonna roll for initiative?
No. Do you have a
No.
dice? Do you have dice? I will. Who doesn't? All right. Okay. If you're in this room and you don't have dice, get the fuck out. I'm just kidding. Apologize for dropping an F-bomb. My sorry. No, please, Sid. No. So what is it? Let's get back on topic here. What is a session 0? What does that mean to you, and what does that look like to you? Have you ever done that before, or what could you hypothesize that to be to you? Anyone? Audience participation? Just jump right in. Yeah.
Go
sir.
for it.
Oh, yeah. Jump right in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Setting the tone is what he said. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because some people come into a D&D session or whatever RPG session thinking that they're going to be epic Lord of the Rings style fantasy, and some people, even in the same group, can think that, I'm looking at my friends here, that it's going to be all dick jokes.
Dick jokes and murder hobos.
Yeah. I'm not, yeah.
Cracking snapping necks and cashing checks is what it's all about. Killing people and getting loot.
Yeah, and having that sort of understanding that, hey, some people are in it for different reasons, and that's not a bad thing, but having that sort of discussion up front really helps you set expectations, and that's what we're all about here because we're all adults dealing with other adults here. We need to be about setting expectations with people, and the tone of the campaign is one of the most important things that you can discuss at a session 0.
What other ideas? Other than the tone, what else would you expect from a session 0?
I know for me, so I don't DM or GM or player exclusively, but we active role play at our table. So I think that for me, it's 2 things. It's first, getting comfortable with the people at the table and kind of, because I think role playing with any time, no matter what, it's kind of uncomfortable, awkward to start with.
Yeah.
And then once everybody gets into it, you kind of, you get more comfortable with it. So if there are new people at the table, it's just kind of easing into that. And then also for me is, I can write a backstory and think of a character, but until I'm actually at the table kind of playing the character, I don't really know how it's going to go. So it's like figuring out who the character is and like acting that out in that real setting. And usually it's different than kind of I had originally planned, but it's in ways better than I.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think that speaks to character development as a very natural progression of a campaign, and not just progressing your character, but also feeling comfortable enough with the people who you're playing with to be able to explore that sort of emotional space of seeing a character go from my character in Eric's campaign, this sort of just very stony, Clint Eastwood-esque character in the Underdark, to a character who's dealing very, very much with issues of personal redemption and duty and sacrifice.
Yeah, and his character, we spend time outside of the campaign discussing his character and things like that. And even my character in Justin's campaign is a deep gnome in charge of protecting an ancient artifact, and the artifact was taken, and he feels like he can't return to his people until he redeems himself. So in Curse of Strahd, obviously there is a huge swell of power where Strahd acquired his powers, and so this character feels compelled, almost yet obligated to acquire that power as a redemption method, and his morality is questioned and his ability to work well with others is questioned. So I think, to your point, as a great player, coming to the table with a few lines of backstory, with a general arced idea, is actually more workable. And then once you begin to play the character, working with your dungeon master to understand, where is my character going? What are my motivations? Why am I even here? What is my purpose? Is my character changing? And then role-playing through those things is fantastic. Especially as a dungeon master, it's very rewarding to see your players grow, both as players and as characters. Did you have something that you wanted to add? You raised your hand a little bit.
Just to switch topics, I think for session 0, the book is number 1, and then sort of what is the hook, and then do you do, like, we're all around the campfire, we're all talking toward introducing each other,
Like kumbaya stuff?
What is a more seamless way to introduce the characters to each other?
Yeah. Justin, you want to talk about it?
Sure. I think the idea of having that kumbaya moment is something that a lot of campaigns really gloss over. And that's, to be honest, that moment at the start, where it's not just a party hook, but an individual character hook that brings all these diverse individuals, that, a dark elf in the surface world, or
What's a deep gnome doing in Barovia?
Yeah, what each of these characters has
Why
a
are you
hook.
here?
And it doesn't just have to be the hook that's written in the book. This is this moment can be taken to set a certain character's motivation throughout the entire campaign, or to really kick off the process of character development. A hook can transition. If a character is starting out the campaign because they're seeking some sort of magical artifact, they are seeking, their order sent them there to fight some evil, whatever. That isn't the character arc that's necessarily going to inform their entire development. That is just going to get you into the headspace of that character. What are they doing? Where can they go from here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to your point, how to seamlessly incorporate a session 0, I actually really like the idea of cooperative gaming that's not D&D for your session 0. So learning how your players interact with each other. How do they discuss? How do they talk? How do they deal with a difficult situation or a problem? Or if you really want to run a D&D session, have them make a small one-shot and just have them play this campaign ahead of time as their characters. So as a kind of a spoiler alert to Tomb of Annihilation, I don't know if you guys listen to the official D&D podcast, but there is a gigantic dragon turtle that lives in the sea outside of Chult, but he's not featured in the adventure, from my understanding, based on the discussions. So perhaps setting up a session that revolves around the lore of the adventure or the campaign that you're about to run, while them playing their own characters to see if they interact well as a singular arc. That's a great way to vet whether or not your players are going to play well with each other and whether or not they're going to play well with you. Now, I will say, as an aside from that, it is really important to be outside of character and to set your expectations ahead of time. That's definitely one of the things that I struggled with when I first started playing D&D and when I first started DMing, was setting expectations. And I think that's part of the session 0. Yes, you wanted to interject? Yeah, you had your finger up like, No problem. No, and please, if you want to interject, or please just just
Go
jump right
for
in.
it.
Yeah.
Just for extra context, this may be varied, but are these people that you know really well? Are they a group of strangers at a hobby shop?
No, really, that's an excellent
Yeah.
point. Actually, so my Out of the Abyss campaign group started from two guys I work with who assembled a group of people, which is actually how I met these two gentlemen who play in my campaign. But actually, the campaign that I'm part of, Curse of Strahd, with Justin, I didn't know these people ahead of time, so we're totally randos. But we're friends now, and it took us a good 6 months to really kind of understand What are the joke levels? What are the goofs? What are we here for? What's your level of role play? That kind of thing. So having that session 0 with people playing together, regardless of how well they know each other, is paramount to understanding both the tone of your campaign and what you're able to tolerate with your campaign. Because it gives you, as a dungeon master, an idea of what your characters and players are willing to do and to tolerate with each other, and how you set the tone of your campaign. So if you're dealing with Out of the Abyss, which is very demon heavy and extreme in madness, it's very sandboxy, is that what they're looking for? Or are they looking for more character development or more role play, which would be Curse of Strahd, or perhaps Storm King's Thunder, which would be more kind of like character development over time? You know, less combat, less hack and slash, get loot, kill demons kind of thing, and more, I need to learn who I really am as a reflection of who I am inside kind of thing. Because as Justin alluded to, regardless of what you think or what you do, every character you make is a reflection of an aspect of you, no matter what. You could make the most obscure, ridiculous, you could make a Kenneku like who lived under a rock forever, but it is still a reflection of your solidarity and your isolation and an aspect of your emotion. So regardless of what you think, every character you make is a reflection of some aspect of you. Just
Yeah. I think I'd like to rewind for a second. One of the things I'd like to focus on now is practical skills that we can take home to our own sessions. So you mentioned, this is something I really caught on, cooperative non-D&D games as a session 0.
Yeah, I love that.
We're talking like, what's it called? Contagion, Outbreak.
Oh, Pandemic.
Pandemic, thank you.
Pandemic is great. Codenames is another really good one. I feel like it's cooperative in nature, but Pandemic is fantastic.
Yeah,
Pick it up. It's delightful.
we're here to sell other games.
There's a billion other like versions of Pandemic, but pick up the original. It's fantastic.
The original is the best one. I like the idea of gauging not only the level of humor, but who in the room is there to be a sort of passive participant versus who is going to be the more active leader type in the party. Because one of the things that I've learned as a DM is that there are going to be people who you try to reach out to, who you create entire quest hooks for, and they're just going to see it and they're going to go, okay, fine, you know.
That's nice. Okay.
Yeah, I'm offering you, if you do this quest, you get a literal lightsaber.
Yeah,
You get a
you get a
lightsaber. You're a
fucking lightsaber,
dragon
sorry.
man fighter, and you get a literal lightsaber.
Get a literal lightsaber.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and that's perfectly
okay.
fine. That's perfectly fine. It's just that I need to understand when I'm doing my preparation that I don't necessarily need to go into an extreme amount of depth with the plot hooks for this person. You know, I think I come, and Eric alluded to this, I approach DMing from the idea that everybody at the table is probably there, is there for some reason, and they've created a character for some reason that's a reflection of themselves. If I give them something that will engage that character, that will give that character some sort of interesting choice to make, that's personal choice, personal development. If I tempt the paladin into becoming an oathbreaker, if I give the deep gnome wizard the keys to vampire immortality.
If I tempt the morally ambiguous, lawful neutral fighter with a demon's axe that promises a legion of followers and you know imbues him with power, you know, it's all about temptation and like pushing those envelopes with your players.
Yeah, I guess does anybody, I think that's a good stopping point. Has anybody experienced that kind of moment either for themselves or someone in their campaigns where you see that sort of payoff happen, something that's been set up for a while, where your character is given some sort of interesting hook, some sort of choice?
And this can be homebrew or within a campaign that you've run, you know, an adventure module that you've specifically run. Anybody? A payoff as a player or a dungeon master? Oh, yeah.
So we have a campaign. This schmuck over here is our DM.
It's fine. He's cool.
He's okay.
Yeah. kudos to him for dungeon mastering.
Yeah.
It's a hard job.
Everything I know.
It's a really hard job.
But with our campaign, we played for, it was about a year that we finished the first arc. It's a homebrew campaign. We created everything for us. And the way that that last session, it tied up things that we had done in the very first session that we played. And like the 5 of us sat there and were like, holy crap, I never would have thought that was a thing. Like that we had the foresight to put these little like snippets and like things in all of the sessions up until then, and then when it actually comes to, you know, the climax, it's amazing. Like we were so like just flabbergasted. It was incredible. So that to me I thought was really cool, is that we can look back on the entirety of that session and see all the places he'd stuck little things to kind of like lead us along and give us clues, and then it's still not at all what we thought it was.
Yeah, and that's kudos to you, by the way, for doing that, especially running a homebrew that lasts that long. We'll talk about homebrew in a second because it's a sore subject for me. I still have open wounds about it. But I completely agree. So as a dungeon master, learning the craft and continuing to sharpen my skills, I think that for me, leaving gems, breadcrumbs, if you will, along the trail for your players to either pick up or to walk past is really important to pay attention to, both within the adventure and outside of the adventure. So if you have a breadcrumb that you've laid that you really want them to pick up, like if, for example, you leave a gem that is like gives them certain amounts of power that would be so beneficial for their character and the future of what you are planning to do, as maybe perhaps you've done, then coax them outside of the session. And that's a point that I wanted to just make momentarily, is that I think it's important to talk to your players individually about their characters and the motivations and the things that they're doing outside of the game. It's okay, in my opinion, and Justin might have a different take on this, and I'll let him speak in a minute. It's okay to part the kimono just a little bit and say, hey, I really wanted your character to do this thing because I think it would be really cool and really important for the future. So let's work on making that an occurrence and making that a reality for the future without revealing too much, but also sort of driving them in a direction to both character development and for plot-driven motivations.
Yeah, I definitely want to jump on that. I've struggled a good deal with, I'm just the type of person who really likes to communicate and share things with people who I'm close to. So I have a difficult time with these people who I've spent the last year and a half doing a campaign with as a DM. I have a difficult time not being like, oh, I really spent a lot of time prepping that Amber Temple. Oh, you got some really hard combat coming up in that Amber Temple. It's going to be hard. It's going to be fun. No, you got a lot of hard combat coming up in the Amber Temple.
Yeah, no, we're fucked. We're dead.
Yeah.
It's cool. Dirthmech's gonna survive.
Okay.
Dirthmech does survive.
But that's something that I had a difficult time with, was determining how much communication, outside of game communication, was appropriate with my players. And I found that I feel like moments, now that I'm prepping for the sort of end game of Curse of Strahd, I feel like there are a lot of things that are more rewarding for me if I hold them to myself. And that's a bit isolating, but what really I found was the appropriate level of communication outside of a game was asking my players what they understood of the situation that was going on. I wanted to assess how effectively I had established the villain of Strahd in Curse of Strahd. Some people saw him, and it was telling that I got different answers from different people. Eric, for example, you were the one who understood most about the background of Strahd, the lore of Strahd. And I think that's a good reflection of the fact that your character, Dirthmech, was delving into his backstory in an effort to emulate him. Other people were quicker to write off his history as someone who was willing to sacrifice, was willing to imprison his entire kingdom, spoiler alert, in order to...
Barovia's trapped. Oh no, we didn't know that.
in order to also capture the spirit of his love, in order to pursue her for eternity. So, I mean, I'm babbling on here. The point I'm trying to make here is that people, I was trying to speak with my players to assess something I thought was key to this campaign, which is the villain of Strahd. That's just the nature of Curse of Strahd. Strahd is the most important thing to understand in this campaign. Asking your players leading questions, I feel like, is a very good exercise outside of the campaign. What does Dirthmek think of the Amber Temple? What does Dirthmek think of this artifact that he found? You know, just trying to understand where your players are and what they're thinking is a good way to understand not only how well you've done your job of setting important things up, but just, you know, checking in and seeing if there's anything that needs to be addressed in a future session in terms of exposition or what have you.
Yeah, so let's take a moment. Let's reel back for a second, and let's go back to session 0, session 1. What are the expectations that you set forth as a dungeon master for your campaigns? What are the expectations that you explain to your players? Both an expectation of yourself, because I think that's fair to expect, to explain what your expectations is. I intend to do these things, and I intend to run this game this way, and I intend to require you to do X, Y, Z. But as a player, since many of you are players as well, what are your expectations that you receive from your dungeon master, or that you expect of your dungeon master? Anybody could chime in. This is an open discussion. I'll start. I'll get the ball rolling. So as a dungeon master, I expect my players to be fully present. I expect them to be off their phone, off their iPad, fully engaged. I expect them to be interactive, and I expect them to have even a resemblance of a character voice. As simple as that may be, I think it's vital to the campaign. You guys are laughing. You guys have experienced something similar? Is that right? Yeah?
A little bit. We're also laughing because of the Adventure Zone.
Oh, the Adventure. Griffin's voice every single time. Clint, yeah.
So
We've been through like 50 episodes, and Clint still can't get it right.
I was just re-listening to the Crystal Kingdom where Justin literally stopped Clint every single time he spoke in, "Oh, not Merle voice.
Oh, not Merle." Yeah. So, and the mechanic behind that is that I need to understand when Alex is talking versus when Adrian is talking. I need to know that, because if Adrian is talking, then that's canonical. That means that is something that I need to act on as a dungeon master. But if Alex is talking because he's metagaming and he is discussing with his players, then that's different, and I don't need to act as a dungeon master. So some of the other expectations that I have is expectations of myself that I have prepared adequately for the session. If I can't prepare adequately for a session, then I won't run one. And that is a disservice. And I have been underneath of dungeon masters who have prepared 20 minutes before the session, and all they've prepared is 3 bullet points. And that is a disservice to your players. So as a dungeon master, do your due diligence, spend time preparing, and make sure that it is congruent with not only the story, but with your characters. I will let Justin jump in, because expectations are paramount to the tone of the campaign, to your dungeon mastering style, to your interaction with your players, because ultimately, that's what it comes down to. D&D ultimately is a shared story. That's what it is. It's a shared story. You as the dungeon master create the world, and the players fill the world with all these amazing things, and you can't expect something from them that they expect differently. You have to be on the same page if you're going to tell the same story. And that's what it's about, is being on the same page and understanding that it is not you versus them. It is the two of you together telling a story.
Yeah, I think I'll add in a few points as to where specifically I've had to have some sort of intercession.
An intervention.
An intervention.
Almost, yes. We've had to stop multiple. We so for my campaign, we actually lost a player due to an intervention. Curly, were you part of this? Anyway, so we brief story. Out of the Abyss, we had a wizard who decided to kill an NPC that was actually vital to information in a particular city. And we paused and decided, you know what, I think you're doing something outside of the game. I think you're just doing this because you want to just be super evil all the time. And he said, you know what, guys, I'm done playing this game. I'm out of here. But he was Skyping in, and the rest of us were playing in person. And his ultimate reasoning was, it's not fun for me online because I'm the only guy on Skype, and I can't hear everybody, and I can't participate live. So I'm just out because this isn't fun. And we really, us around the table, decided, you know what, this is a perfect time to reflect on what's going on. Are we, as players around the table, buying into this story? Are we just murder hobos? Is that what we are? What is our ultimate goal? Are we just going to kill everybody and just get to the end? Is that our goal? And so we had to kind of reevaluate, and ultimately for that player, it was not about the story arc, it was about engagement. So again, expectations, I didn't do a good job when he moved to set that expectation and to like cover that tone with him playing online, because I've been on the other side of things like that. I've been a Skype player in multiple campaigns, and it has been super awful, terrible. When you can't hear what other people are saying, and when you can't experience the roles and the excitement and the jokes, and you just don't know what the hell is going on, because you're the only outsider, and you're via computer screen, and everybody else is sitting around a table loving, laughing life, and drinking brews and eating Doritos.
Yeah. I feel like that's a great point. One of the times that I had a lack of, where I had to have some sort of intervention with a player, was a lack of engagement, like you said. And what I determined was, you know, I waited on calling somebody out for probably 2 or 3 sessions. Someone who is
Multiple.
Yeah, on their phone, tablet the whole time, only really chimed in when they had something to say. I sat on that for a while, and that affected me as a DM because I'm seeing this happen, and I'm like, oh, well, you're not respecting me. But it was one of those situations where I just needed to have a difficult conversation. I was avoiding having a difficult conversation, and it was affecting me. So I needed to take ownership of the fact that this behavior is happening. If I don't do something, then it's just going to keep happening, and I'm only going to get more upset about it.
So what are the expectations? I mean, yeah, we've shared a few examples. What are some examples that you've experienced, or that you expect from your dungeon master if you're a player specifically, or you know any? Yes, yeah, go ahead.
I guess I've experienced like people not knowing how to use their character. Not knowing anything about the stats my character has and things like that. I kind of hope that they kind of study, and especially when they study the DM and stuff, that they kind of study their character.
Yeah, I can talk to this both as a dungeon master who has never played a paladin but has to frequently play a paladin because he is missing in combat and just in general. Yes, I completely agree. I think that as a dungeon master, part of the expectation is that your players are the masters of their character sheet. So if you are a player in a campaign, then your dungeon master should expect you as the sole proprietor of your character sheet, the creator of this entity that is going to adventure throughout Faerun or the Underdark or whatever other plane of existence that you choose to adventure in. You need to be the master of your character sheet. Now, to play devil's advocate and to piggyback on that, Justin and I both require that our players send us advanced copy of their player character sheets because we want to double check things. I have caught numerous occasions where my wizard has got spells that he shouldn't, and where he has prepared things that he shouldn't, and on numerous occasions where my rogue has got things that he shouldn't, and where my fighter maybe has one extra maneuver or things. But ultimately, as the Dungeon Master, you're responsible for the player character sheet. But setting that expectation, the players are ultimately responsible for the munitions, the rations, the spells, et cetera, throughout the character sheet.
So one thing I think is important to bring up is if someone isn't living up to the expectations that you have for them as a player, it's totally cool to speak with them privately and say, hey, I realize that we're spending a good half an hour every session having to discuss with you how your character works. Let's sit down and go through everything that you can do, and with the intention of making it easier for you to act in the moment and giving you more agency as a player. At the end of the day, there's only so much you can do, and your players have to meet you halfway. But sometimes it's difficult to even start that conversation if you're the player. Like, I'm just here kind of just here hanging out with people. I didn't realize what I was signing up for. Now people are yelling at me because I am not using my cleric spells right. Whatever.
Zone of truth.
Zone of truth. That conversation can be hard to start. Like, it can be very easy to clam up and play the victim, whatever. And maybe to some extent you are feeling a little bullied. I think the best thing to do is to start the conversation. And as the DM, I'm not the interpersonal coach. I am the person who's willing to start the conversation.
Yeah, I completely agree with Justin on this. I think as the Dungeon Master, you are the artificer, you are the arbitrator between players and the campaign, both as the Dungeon Master and themselves, and as player to player. Now, that's not to say that it's unreasonable to let your players work it out, but it is up to you to make the final ruling. So that's another expectation that I have as a Dungeon Master is...
Go ahead, Matt.
No, absolutely. So I think you probably agree with this. As a Dungeon Master, I expect my players to respect my ruling, regardless of whether or not the ruling is actually and factually correct in the moment. I am all about players arguing a point. We're at a point where in Out of the Abyss that they have exceeded a level with which that I have ever played with before, in which case I am unfamiliar with their particular mechanics of their individual characters. However, I am willing and absolutely on board with listening to what they have to say and with abiding by their specific mechanics. So for example, I had a descent into a cavern. It was like a 120-foot drop. And my rogue decided, you know what? I'm just going to scale the wall. I'm just going to just scale the wall down. I'm just going to just do it. And okay, what do I need to roll? And I was like, well, roll acrobatics, I guess. And he's like, well, but I have a second story work, which allows me advantage on this. And also I'm taking my time. So why am I rolling about this? I thought, oh, you're right. Okay, well, I guess just roll dexterity and add your saving throw, but you get advantage. Sure. And he's like, yeah, sure, okay. So the point is that as a Dungeon Master, when your players are at a point where they're arguing their ability checks, or they're arguing for skills or damage rolls, or hiding or recover or proficiency bonuses, whatever it may be, don't say no. Work with them and say, you know what, I think canonically and thematically that makes a lot of sense that your character would do that, and with extreme skill. So let's work on that.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a platitude now that you hear among DMs, this attitude of don't say no. And I think there's also been somewhat of a shift in what I've been seeing and what I've been reading online over the past few months, to go from don't say no to co-opting the comedy principle of yes and. So to
Yes,
summarize that,
And roll persuasion.
the idea of yes and is that you're not shutting down anything that's happening in the action right now. You are taking things one step further. You are saying, all right, I've got a rogue in a room with a white dragon wormling, small, like maybe 5 by 10 room.
He's level 1, by the way.
He's a level 1 rogue with a white dragon
Did a
wormling.
bad thing.
He is about to have
this fucking
a
rogue.
very bad
Should have
day.
died. He should have died.
He asked me,
I wanted him to die.
is there anything I can hide behind?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely accurate. I agree with Justin. As in, taking an opportunity as a dungeon master to realize that the situation is against your player, that the challenge is stacked against you, and realizing if you're a player, realizing that oh shit, I'm up against a wall and there is a white dragon breathing down my face. So argue your position, ask lots of questions, and as a dungeon master, if you're tied to the character, if this is a campaign that requires that specific character to advance, then work around the rules. You, as the dungeon master, are the ultimate say. You have ultimate control over the rules. And as I mentioned before, that's an expectation that I have as a dungeon master, that my players respect my ruling. Now, that's not to say that I don't retcon. We all do it, right? In the moment of say, oh yeah, you go ahead and jump 20 times your strength modifier because I think that's what the rule is. Oh yeah, no, duh. And then I look it up later and I realize it's not that. That's a different thing. Retconning rules is different, but thematically and canonically, it should remain the same. So as a dungeon master, work with your player, especially in a difficult situation, to assure that they are enjoying and having a challenging moment, such as a white dragon deciding to try to chomp you as a level 1 character as you hide behind a dinner table.
Right. I think that the crux of what you're doing when you're saying no is you're inhibiting someone's agency as a player. The important thing about D&D is not necessarily that it be that you respect the rules or respect the challenge that's being put forth, but that you give your players a sense of agency and you respect their ability to take agency even in a situation where the odds have been stacked so incredibly against them. A level 1 character facing down a white dragon wormling, that character should probably be dead. But really what the situation was that I have a new player who is trying to make the best out of a situation where they are out of a hopeless situation. And it's not up to me to say as the DM, you're boned, like there's nothing to hide behind. None of your solutions are going to work. I can instead say, yes, if that person asks me if he can hide, then I can say yes, and it's a very small area to hide in, or yes, and what other ideas can you come up with? Let's work to something. I think that sort of give and take, that back and forth, is what makes D&D special. You are establishing, you're giving a space for your players to do something actively and to have agency in this world while still respecting the rules to some extent.
I completely agree. So switching gears only slightly, speaking of kind of working with your players, something that as a dungeon master that I have used in the past, and I'll put the kimono for my players in the room, is, so as a dungeon master, you have a screen, of course, and you dice roll behind the screen. Fudge your numbers. On occasion, that's okay, because it's all about your players having a good time and your players advancing if that is appropriate. Something that I have done in the past is I have decided that, you know what, this Varrock, this winged demon thing, yeah, it's supposed to die now because I've got 3 players ganging up on it and it really can't decide, it really can't beat them. So I'm gonna end this combat early. And so I fudged some numbers to enhance their experience and to provide them with a thematic and canonical win against a demon. Now, to kind of back up on that is I decide ahead of time the challenge rating against, and yeah, I see you smiling, yeah. So deciding on challenge rating, that is a whole other section of the Dungeon Master's Guide, and even the Player's Handbook has a section on challenge rating. As a Dungeon Master, I will say that providing your players with challenging yet rewarding experiences and encounters is important. Do not press them so hard every single time that they have to go nuclear on every single encounter, because ultimately they will recoil and they will decide, you know what, this world is so incredibly dangerous that I cannot live in this world. I cannot do anything in this world without the repercussions of a saving throw or some sort of monster jumping out at me trying to claw my face off. So provide them with some easy encounters, some medium encounters, something that will allow them to like basically just like feel like beefy, you know, like just like hack and slash, like, oh, okay, my sword cuts his head off. Okay, he's dead. That cultist is dead. Okay, I firebolt 2 cultists because I have an action and a bonus action. Okay, yeah, they're dead. Like, just, you know.
You remember Oblivion? Do you ever play Elder Scrolls?
No, I never did.
The idea in that game is that the world levels with you, and no matter where you go, no matter what you do, you're fighting things that are strong. You walk out of town, and instead of fighting like the wolves that were there at the beginning of the game that you would one-shot, you're fighting like gigantic armored demon monsters everywhere you go, and bandits that for some reason have glass top-tier armor now that you're level 10. I think it's the same concept in D&D. The idea that no matter where you go, you're fighting very hard enemies that kind of just, it doesn't need to be. Like, you should only...
They test your mettle, but ultimately, like, if you look at the Dungeon Master's Guide, it says 6 to 8 encounters per day. And 4 of them are roughly easy, like 3 of them are medium, and 1 of them is deadly, or something like that. It's some obscure, like, descriptive, like, narrative on the number of encounters. But if you are running a campaign and your characters are like 8th level or higher, a medium encounter could take you 45 minutes of a session, which is unnatural. I'm just gonna say that. So design your encounters based on what your player's level is and based on the theme of the encounter.
We've been talking for a while.
Yeah, I want to hear from you guys. So one question I have is, what do you do to prepare descriptive narratives for your players? So if your players are about to encounter a new space or perhaps a new enemy, what do you do to prepare the descriptive narrative that is to follow? I'll chime in.
What's up?
Go ahead, please.
So, like, what you're talking about is sort of like priming them to, like, fight a monster? Is that sort of right?
Yes, exactly. So let's say your characters enter a new space. Let's say they enter a cavern, and you're about to describe the space. And you know that this is a quintessential fight, that they have to do this thing. An example, out of the Abyss, they fought a Garistro, which is a like high-level demon, like basically a lieutenant to Baphomet, which is the demon lord of beasts. How would you prepare that descriptive narrative?
Yeah, so I've actually, I didn't come up with this, but I read online. A good idea is to, like, prime them ahead of time. So essentially, you give them, like, take a zombie, for instance. If you have, like, a zombie that has, like, a certain red firefly bugs that you prime the players, but they see them every time, and then what happens afterwards is that the zombies that are there. And so do this a couple times, and then if you want to do like a big encounter or a big fight, what you do is just have like, you just tell them, you just see a massive amount of these red firefly animals, like, and then they're like, oh shit, we need to get out of here or barricade or something.
Yeah, I think the idea of reflecting and preparing for a session in such a way as you know that you need to set these breadcrumbs, say working backwards, you know that you have a big zombie encounter at the end of it, and you want to set that up, you know, asking yourself, how am I going to set this up? It's a really important thing.
Anybody else? Yeah, no, please.
I think I actually think that kind of my description is one of the weaker, one of my weaker aspects, but I think breaking I think a lot of games have to deal with kind of breaking the video game mentality of newer players in tabletop gaming. So like everyone's like, oh, we need to find all the NPCs, get like the quest points and everything that is described as important. So when I would describe a setting or a scene, I would describe a lot of things, maybe throw in something that's important, maybe throw in a couple of things that weren't important. And then when the players focus on, oh, well, he said this, there's a hobo sitting on a barrel, he must be involved in this thing, and they end up accidentally killing a hobo. And they realize, oh shit, like he was just totally irrelevant, he just sitting in the street and we just killed him. And we felt the DM was like giving us a quest giver to go seek out. And so
That didn't happen.
Yeah.
Not saying that happened canonically. Just saying, just theoretically.
So I guess kind of giving and maybe throw in a little bit, like maybe there's a weakness, like a very small hint, just relevant information, but also seemingly trivial things, just to kind of flesh it out and maybe to make it like it's not just like this is like what you have to do.
Yeah, I agree completely. With my homebrew, which we can talk about the disaster that was my fucking homebrew. Oh God, no, seriously, it was fucking terrible. It was awful. I learned a lot, but it was fucking awful. I agree with you completely. Actually, that's a Dungeon Master style that I would love to explore more, and I'm getting better at, is providing red herrings, as you describe, is NPCs or plot points that are not actually important to the whole story. Like, just providing them with, hey, here's this NPC, he does this thing, but ultimately it has zero bearing on the entirety of the story. They could die yesterday and it would mean nothing to the ultimate story. So I agree with you completely, and I think as a Dungeon Master, providing those types of red herrings keeps your players guessing with your descriptions. And ultimately, that's what we're talking about, is descriptions. So what do you do to prepare for a specific moment that you know your players have to encounter as a descriptive moment?
And I think there are different mentalities at work there. You have a choice of saying to yourself, I'm going to make it fairly explicit what is important here and what is not. And if you end, and you're giving some description of a city street, and you end it with, and a hobo is conspicuously sitting on a wooden barrel, whittling a steak and looking at you intently as he smokes his pipe. It's pretty obvious that you're emphasizing that, and maybe you want to, or maybe maybe you want that to be a red herring. Maybe you want that to be a major plot point. I think either way, you're betraying to your players the fact that you're putting some sort of intention there. It's up to you to determine whether or not you want to make it obvious what is and what is not important in the description that you give. One thing that I learned to do is to speak. As part of my preparation, I'll prepare a few monologues to set up a setting. The general guidelines I follow are that I'll give 3 descriptors. If each of them can apply to some different sense like the feeling of cold rain on your skin, the scent of pine trees as you climb up the foothills of a mountain, the appearance of the white snow and the paving stones on the road that have been frozen and thawed and cracked. That engages different senses and makes it easier to relate to the setting that you're putting forth, because people will more naturally gravitate towards associating with one sense or another. If you give that description to somebody who's not in the campaign and ask them explicitly in the moment, because you can't ask your players this, you ask them, what did you latch onto in that description? Could you describe this place for me? What are you envisioning when I say this? I think that's perfectly legit. You know, you just you go and grab a drink with someone and, you know, give them that spiel and ask them a few pointed questions like, what do you think? Don't contextualize it at all. It's just, what do you think of this setting? Do you have a good picture of what's going on? Can you describe it back to me? Can you build on it? Now, the important part is, if I really had something that I wanted to convey there, if I wanted to set up a particular thing that I wanted the party to investigate, if the person who I told that description to, who has nothing to do with the game, didn't clue into that at all, I don't know how I can really expect my party to when I'm doing it. And I can't stop after I give in that description and say, okay, well, what did you guys clue in on? And I can't really go back and amend my description without making it very pointedly obvious that I'm trying to redirect their attention. I think doing that exercise to work with someone, a third party, and really hone in on your ability to use words to emphasize your points, the way you speak, the words that you use, the imagery that you use. You can train yourself to emphasize what you want to and de-emphasize everything else, and make trivial things trivial and make important things important just by how you describe them.
Yeah. To Justin's point, it's very important to be consistent with your language, especially when you have provided a character as a dungeon master, when you've provided a character with information outside of the campaign. So, for example, if you are going to describe a particular tomb, then it is important that when those players are asking about that tomb or they are reaching that tomb, that you use the same words. Yes, please.
Yeah, I think with words too, one of the things to be aware of, I know that in my little notebook, I have an entire page of nothing but descriptive words, because I find that sometimes people use the same word too often, like crispy is one that happens to be a thing. And then people
The
say,
zombie's crispy.
Crispy.
and so it's like,
Each cast firebolt, he's crispy.
described as crispy, it has a much less impact than something is actually quite crispy. And so I find that having even a list of words, if you just kind of like, with mine I have like little indicators, it'll say like forest or water or things like that. So I can, if I know we're going into an area that's highly forested, I can go to that portion and I have a list of words to use in my descriptors.
Yep.
Because the more varied your language is, the more these areas will stand apart from each other, because you don't want all of these areas to feel the same every time you go to the forest. It should feel like the last crispy forest. It should feel like
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
different or crispy.
I think that's a great point. And one thing I like to do is to associate a few words with a particular character, so that you know if someone is sinister, then that is one character.
dirtbag.
If,
Sorry, my gnome wizard is out to be Strahd. He's subverting the party. I'm out to fuck them all. I can't wait.
yeah.
Sorry that paused the moment here.
Yeah.
All right. Let me just kickstart here, Justin. I agree completely. I spend time I spend time witnessing nature, and I spend time online looking at various Reddit threads, looking at just landscapes. And what I do is I actually will physically write, because that's the best way I learn. If I type it out, I will forget it in 30 seconds. As soon as I walk away from the computer screen, I will forget whatever the hell I wrote. So I physically write it out, and I use a specific notebook and pen to write these things down, but I will spend time describing the scene. So I will write prose. And whether or not those prose actually end up in the campaign or not doesn't matter, because I try to use as expansive a vocabulary as I can to stretch my own mind and use as many variables as I can, and then decide, okay, that's an excellent word to incorporate. The difference between concurrent and concomitant, for example, concurrent meaning parallel, right? Concomitant meaning synergistically. So the use of those two different words means something in a campaign. For example, Justin recently used the word primordial in Curse of Strahd, which he was using as a descriptor, but in Dungeons & Dragons, we know that primordials actually have a physical form and that they mean something. So two of us actually were like, excuse me, what?
Yeah.
So
Nerds.
be careful with your descriptors with the lore of D&D, but I agree with you 100%. I recently, back in August, I spent a week out at Powell in Arizona, and there was this particular rock formation that was smooth. It was as smooth as glass, but one spot had just an origin of these coagulated rocks that just spewed from it. And every time we passed by it, I thought to myself, the rock face vomited coagulated rocks. And I thought, that's a great descriptor. Damn it, Eric, why don't you write that down in your notebook, because you're a dummy. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm curious, since earlier there was talk about, introducing your characters to a scene or encounter. So a little bit sounds like you might describe it kind of like an opening section of intro new section in a book, the characters in the book move to a new scene, describe the different senses of that. I'm curious about your thoughts on that version of just quick paragraph or two written versus lately I've been doing very much cinematic of camera pans over to that, even helping ask my player what might we use to transition out of this.
Yeah, you want to just.
So cinematic's been going.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Sure. I think it speaks to how you and how your players perceive something happening. If you perceive this as from the perspective of a camera looking down at the party and what the party's doing, which is kind of a natural way to perceive things when we're playing D&D, then really narrowing the focus on what is being shown to the players and what is happening in order to set up the action in the scene. What's up?
Yeah, no, to piggyback what Justin was saying, so I'm in alignment with what you're saying. I'm all about providing at least 3 to 4 sentences of description prior to setting the scene. So if a party walks into a new cavern, then I try to describe what they are able to see using their passive perception scores. And then also, if there are additional lights or other things that I want them to see, because I think that would move the plot forward. So for example, they recently walked into a cavern that was about 100 feet deep and about 60 feet wide and about maybe 35 feet tall, with, mismatched, completely haphazardly shaped tents and shackles. But in the center of this cavern was a huge bonfire with a singular individual standing to the side of it, creating a long shadow. I described to them the bonfire, the shadow, the various shackles, but trying to leave out the length of the cavern and trying to get them to describe the focus of the particular scene, and then if they choose to say, well, how long is the cavern? How far can I see? Then at that point, then I use their ability scores. Does that answer your question? Or?
A little bit of it, but I also had a follow-up one on just setting a scene or just creating that environment. One thing I occasionally do, which might show my lack of preparation or just me trying to do things out. Sometimes when I get a scene and I really am like open, it's like, okay, as long as it's not A or B of like descriptions in the scene for stuff I probably need to happen, tapping the players to be like, all right, describe an aspect of this forest, or like, what is the thing your character notices in this forest? And as long as it's not something that conflicts with what I need for the story, applying that to
It's an excellent way to involve your players, but at the same time, they're also not attuned to what you're thinking.
I was hoping on a level of like getting them involved and also a little bit of like minor world building. So even if it's just something of like, okay, hey, this is a strange moss that grows here with a cured property, and it comes up in their narrative or.
Yeah, I like in the idea the shared world building and from the perspective of setting up callbacks, seeing something that a character called out as existing in this world and having it come back later could be potentially rewarding. But to what Eric was saying, I think unless your players have really bought in to the idea that this is a world that they're going to help flesh out, this is a world that they're going to have a say in, which goes back to our session 0 talk, I think in most cases, the players will typically default to the DM to tell them what is important in a scene. It is usually up to the DM to emphasize the feeling, the sights and sounds and feelings of what's happening in a scene, and then perhaps ask a player for a character's reaction to that, rather than asking for specific details as to what is in the scene.
I would completely agree. I think it's up to the Dungeon Master to set the world and to describe the world. And if your players are attuned to that sort of thing, if they're more likely to describe than participate, then yes, go for that. But otherwise, it's up to you to describe and then let them investigate, if you will. So we're
We got like
yes.
10, 15 minutes.
I would love to actually open up the floor right now. Justin and I have been chit-chatting just nonstop at you guys. So I want to open the floor at this point to ask questions, to open a conversation between you, and explore any of your plights, whatever it may be. Yes, yes, sir.
Have you guys found any way to make the Skype roleplay less painful?
Yeah. So I've had experience with two different groups of people using this. One gentleman from Hawaii Skyping in on us. No.
No.
The issue becomes ability to connect and understand what's going on with the campaign and with the players, and then with the ability to be heard. So ultimately, Skype, or Google Hangouts, whatever it may be, is not a good modality. But if everyone is playing via Roll20 or some other Fantasy Grounds, some other, or even as the Adventure Zone, they all play via Skype because it's all descriptive and they're all just voice communication. If everyone is playing with the specific medium that you're engaged in, then yes, it works.
Yes.
Otherwise, no, it doesn't.
I was just going to jump on that really quick. The problem I've always had with that sort of interaction is that if you're sitting at your computer, looking at your screen, you're going to get distracted. You're going to be looking at Reddit, Facebook, whatever. Having Roll20, having Fantasy Grounds, whatever, having just JPEGs that you share over Skype, as long as there's something to look at, that's going to be reducing the likelihood that your players are off looking at.
Yeah, 100% agree. I try if I have a Roll20 or a Skype player, I try to create a map for every encounter or some sort of descriptive picture that I throw up as hey, you guys see this thing where there's purple lights that are dancing around these stalactite structures that have windows lit with seamless fireless candles or whatever, whatever it may be. Men's and brands and style stuff. So whatever it may be, yeah, find the medium and also talk to the player that is rolling that medium to understand, are you okay? Are you good? Do you understand the notes?
Yeah.
Do you take notes? Is everything,
Checking in
please.
with people.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to talk about Skype. In our session, we actually made Skype work. Because we were originally 5 group of people that played around a table, and then 2 of our friends, who are a couple, moved to New York City. And we didn't want to end our campaign, and we heard all these horror stories about Skype. So what we did was actually required a lot of research to figure out how to make it work.
And money.
And money.
Money, so
Money.
Yeah, no, seriously, like the more you invest in Roll20, like it works.
There's a program called
Or Fancy Grounds, I'm not biased.
XSplit, and it's used for streaming. XSplit can directly go to Skype. So what we do is we set up an XSplit screen. So we're running 3 webcams. So we have one on us as the players, one pointed down at our map, and then one.
Curly, you
pointed
getting
down.
this? Curly,
Then what we
you
do
getting this?
is we push that to Skype. We plug the computer, it's a laptop, into our television that we have in the little area, and we face it towards the player. So when we're looking, we can look directly at the people who are on Skype. It seems like they're looking directly at us because of the way the cameras are situated, they can still see Mikey as he's DMing. And anytime we do anything with our minis and our map, they can see that too. And so with that, we also have an external microphone plugged in, or you can use one of the microphones on the webcam, and it picks up the audio a lot better.
This sounds incredible. I feel like I need to get your contact information because I need to work a Skype guy in. He's our resident paladin in the Underdark, who's the lawful good. And he smites very little. It seems unusual to fight demons.
So I will say that it still doesn't replace, like obviously everybody being there will always be superior, but I think that, instead of us just killing the campaign, it's been surprisingly decent.
Yeah, it was
So
fun.
it's
Yeah.
there's a lot of prep to we have like mic booms and stuff that we're duct
We're, like,
taping cameras
taping
to.
cameras.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think people that are willing to use Skype or other modalities to bring people into their campaign are more likely to be in line with that type of mentality and that type of work, and they're also more in line with understanding that it takes one person to talk at a time, and the goofs will be a little more subtle and more suppressed, but everyone can still have a good time because everyone's still quote unquote around the table. Yeah, no, I agree completely.
Anything else? Crazy character deaths?
Yeah,
What's up?
no, yes, sir. Yes, Evan.
So I know a lot of DMing traditionally goes into kind of like verbal and kind of story preparation. Have you ever done any preparation like kind of physical props?
Yes.
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 100%. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Curse of Strahd. So,
Oh God, Curse of Strahd was amazing. That
spoiler
first
alert.
session. Oh God, first session.
Yes.
With the candle.
the candles. So one of the things that I like to establish is a strong sense of atmosphere, a good use of descriptive language, and there are so many times that you can take that out of the game and into the living room that you set up. So for example, Curse of Strahd, one of the first things that you do in that campaign, spoiler alert, is you go get a tarot reading, basically. The tarot reading determines a number of
the Death Lord.
random elements in the game that will affect your campaign. It can be different every single time. So I set up candles. I put out this ornate deck of cards that they sell for the game.
Turn the lights down low.
It was
You turn the lights down low. We got real sexual with it.
I put on some Al Green, and so I mean I took that aspect out of the game and made it physical. You can do things like you can put out different color lightings. You could just find atmospheric songs on whatever streaming service you use. You can absolutely turn it into you can transform the space that you normally play in, and
Yeah,
it's not just around your kitchen table anymore. It's in Barovia.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I completely agree with Justin. So, something that I will echo what he had done, and something that has been difficult to do in many campaigns, but I encourage you to explore that idea in that realm, is embodying that particular entity. So, for example, Madame Eva from Curse of Strahd, he had thrown a shawl over himself, and he had produced a physical deck of cards and a candle, and he had beckoned us around a table. We all just stand, and we're all looking, we're all just like, in this moment, we're all just standing, just like, oh my God, what is Madame Eva doing? And Justin had embodied the essence of that NPC. And I have done a terrible job with embodying the demon lords from Out of the Abyss, but at the same time, you can create situations and moments where you unexpectedly change the setting of your players and your characters, and you decide, let's go outside. Let's listen to the bugs. Like let's for a moment be in nature, and let me describe to you a situation in which you are camping in this particular place, and a group of minotaurs walks up to you and they ask you for this thing. So take it in other levels and other venues. Yeah.
So most of my tables have been kind of like one shots, not so much D&D, but more contemporary supernatural thing called Lacuna. And I found some of the best, I can't build too much because they're rarely connected, at least strictly. But some of the most involved I've gotten is either like, instead of me narrating this person they're chasing, it was a scientist. So I did a journal page that written up, steadily degrading mental state. Maybe later once you're starting to be burned up and torn. Or one of the most proud of is sort of actually kind of printing out their MacGuffin, but and it's like some tags on there. Oh, you're actually interacting with this. You scan what the key cards are, and you'll actually generate sound effect reactions, key phrases, and so on. It was substituting for you don't have lengthy campaign to build on, but pulling out beyond just me sitting here talking to someone else.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of D&D. I'm honestly, like, canonically, I mean, you're describing the world, and you are creating an environment, and your players are interacting with that. So it's D&D in its essence. Yes.
I'm curious about your homebrew and why.
Oh God. Okay. All right.
Scope.
Okay.
I'll tell you right now. Let's have a conversation about scope. It's real easy to let scope creep happen in a tabletop RPG. The thing is, if you tease the existence of additional information in an RPG world, your players have the right to tug on those threads. If you establish the existence of an order of paladins that have existed for millennia, shaping the events of this land, your players will probably follow up on those threads. So if you don't want to talk about it, if you haven't done any of that prep and you don't want to do that prep, don't mention it.
He's 100% accurate. So I created my first. I'll try and be as brief as possible. But my first dungeon mastering experience was actual homebrew, and I created it was a floating city. It was a resort that had a secret demon thing inside of it.
Did you just want to gloss over that happening in your campaign? Seriously?
Dude, you have no idea.
Okay.
I'll read you the notes sometime, Justin. Anyway, ultimately, what I'll say about my homebrew is that I had been overly ambitious, and that I had ultimately led my characters down a path that was super dangerous. And what I mean by that is they were making trap rolls literally every 50 feet. Mm-hmm. And I kid you not. Yeah. I had trapped the shit out of this place. And they were in at a sewer at level 3 with goblins. And I had blades of murder trying to kill them. So I had explored a lot of dungeon mastering things, and ultimately they ended up in this place where I called the Artificer, which was kind of the wheel of like the great wheel of cosmetology, where they could jump between planes. And ultimately, I had planned for them to jump between planes to find these various pieces of this artifact that would like stop the demons. But ultimately, they decided, you know what, this place is way too trapped and way too like shitty. We're just gonna like kill the demons and like stop them from taking this one thing from this one place, and we're done after that. And I kid you not, like 15 to 20 hours of preparation out the window.
Yeah.
Just gone. No, literally just gone.
I'll say one thing very quickly about my design philosophy. Dungeons and Dragons exists as a very different kind of medium from other sort of epic fantasy or epic stories that have come to light recently or come to popularity recently. Unlike things like Game of Thrones, where the characters exist as a very small piece of a very large world, Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop RPGs should focus on the players and what they can do to impact the world. Whatever they can do is the most important thing, because that establishes their agency. And that's the only thing that you should really focus on.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And my initial homebrew did not focus on their agency. It focused on the entirety of the world. So ultimately, I figured out a way for them to like defeat the campaign because I messed up. So yeah, so the point I want to make about homebrew is that keep the scope small and manageable. There are guides in the Dungeon Master's Guide about creating arcs. So a beginning, so a hook, which we talked about, a hook, and then a turn, which leads them down a specific path, and then finally a turn toward the climax. Is kind of the 3-act of a campaign if you are to run your own homebrew. Now, I will say that my homebrew grew in vast proportion beyond its own scope. So what I will say is that if you are to homebrew, which you've done successfully, keep it limited if it is your first homebrew. Please. Keep it to one town, one region. Keep a simple goal. Make the arc 5 to 6 sessions until you understand what it is to Dungeon Master a homebrew campaign. Because ultimately, if you don't pull on previous experience, you are screwed. I've learned more from running Out of the Abyss as a Dungeon Master because of its previous setups and its ability to inject my own understanding of the rules. But running a homebrew as my first campaign was a fucking disaster. My players were very upset with me. Thankfully, I'm still friends with them, but ultimately, don't do that.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say about that.
Any other thoughts? Bad character deaths?
Yes, sir.
Have y'all ever tried telling a story in a different way for a one-shot?
Yes. I've run multiple one-shots. Actually, I created a one-shot that Justin played in that lasted roughly 8 hours. Curly was part of that. The components of the one-shot were very similar to ultimately the way D&D is told, right? You have a hook, you have a goal, and then ultimately there's a twist. And then you find a BBEG, which is a bad but evil guy. So the story itself involved 6 to 8 encounters of varying difficulties. They could surpass them. There were varying terrains that they could surpass or encounter, and then ultimately they encountered the bad evil guy. But for the most part, when it came to one-shots or like singular campaigns, the character development was minimal and it focused mostly on combat and puzzle solving. So I will say, as a Dungeon Master, if you are going to design a one-shot, design it around puzzles. because your characters will fucking hate puzzles.
I'd say that a one-shot poses a very good exercise, a chance for a very good exercise in time management. One of the things I've done in the one-shots that I've written and run is I have estimated how much I think everything is an encounter in a one-shot. Everything is an encounter. A discussion with an NPC is an encounter, a puzzle is an encounter, a trap is an encounter, a combat encounter is an encounter. Have an idea in the back of your mind how much time you expect it to take, or rather, what more importantly, how much time you want to devote to a specific encounter. If you think it's going to take half an hour to set up the arc of the story and you're pushing that 20-25 minute mark, wrap it up. Just get to the meat of it, wrap it up, and say, just give your players the indication that, okay, well, we're done here, let's move on. Maybe that's not the best approach to apply to a longer term campaign because you really want to respect the narrative. But when you are running that one-shot campaign, it gives you, it's very good exercise and gives you the ability to know how long things are going to take.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Like one-shot campaigns, for those of you Dungeon Masters out there who are interested in one-shots, or even like 2 to 3 arc campaigns, like moving the plot forward is paramount, despite what your encounters and players are doing. Now that's not to say that you are disregarding the rules or what your players are doing, and if you have a TPK, do it. Which is one point I wanted to make real quickly before we wrap up is, as a Dungeon Master, don't be afraid to total party kill. Don't be afraid of that. Do not. I will say that again. Do not be afraid to total party kill, TPK. Because if you create a world that the players should not be in and they choose to go down that road, that is their choice. It is your obligation to warn them and to suggest that they do not go down that road. But if they choose to, then there are consequences to pay. As with any choice in life, there are consequences. So remember that there are consequences to your character's actions, there are consequences to your player actions. If they're metagame, there are consequences to your Dungeon Master's actions. And I would like to spend the last couple minutes to answer any Dungeon Master questions. There are so many things that I didn't even get to, that Justin didn't even get to. This discussion could last for literal hours if we let it.
Yeah, I'm a huge nerd about this, so if you have anything.
I'm going to say I love dungeon mastering. I think it's one of the best components of. I was not a dungeon master until I had met a couple of guys who played ahead of time, but really truthfully, I didn't become a true advocate of the game, dungeon master, until I met these guys. So truthfully, it takes the right people to spur you into inspiration and guide you into preparing the most amazing adventure that your players can experience.
Yeah, surround yourself with players who inspire you and people who inspire you in general.
Yeah.
And find ways to connect to them if you're not.
Yeah, yeah. So I will say that dungeon mastering is all about the shared story, and share that story. Be involved with your characters. Be involved with your players. And truthfully, it's about you and them. You make the world, and they populate it. They embody it. They create all of the narrative. And if they're having fun and they're enjoying it, and it's seemingly canonical and somewhat silly, whatever it may be, yeah, let it go. Because ultimately, it's not you as a dungeon master versus the players, as previously described by Gary Gygax, who, God rest his soul, Tomb of Horrors, But ultimately, it's you creating an adventure and sharing a moment with them. So I encourage you to share that story with them. Don't say no. Say, you know what, you can try and create your challenge ratings and develop a story that fits you and them and have a good time. Any last questions? We've got like 5 minutes. Anybody?
What's up?
Yes.
So sharing the story with the players, is it a bad idea, like if you're on a long campaign, to give them information cards like that each character would know?
No.
No, one thing
No.
I like to do, one thing I did with Eric, with his character, is going into it based on a character's intelligence or how much a character would know about that world. You can establish, say, 10 different facts that you know about that world. And then you have that character roll intelligence and apply some sort of modifier based on how much they're familiar with that world. If they roll a 16, then they get 8 of the 10 cards with facts written on them randomly. Does that make sense? Yeah, so just things that they know.
Oh no, I would agree. So if a character has an intelligence score or whatever, wisdom score, whatever it may be, let's say a character, using this example, my particular wizard, Dirthmech, knows that there is a secret power to be had inside a specific temple in Curse of Strahd. He is focused on that. So his particular role strategy is to acquire that knowledge. And so I roll with Justin to acquire various knowledges about that aside from the party. So I, as a player, work with my Dungeon Master to learn new information that is not privy to them. And I keep that information. Now, I will say, as a player, I particularly have revealed that my character is out to acquire the power of Strahd. Now, there's a difference, and there's a long debate, and you can research this online. There's a long debate between player knowledge and character knowledge, which is a separate, it's a separate information. As a player, I feel that I should share the knowledge with my players because we're sharing a story together. But as a character, my character will not share that information with my other characters.
And it's perfectly fine to enable your players to do that.
So that's the difference, is as a player, you have to draw that line and you have to understand between player knowledge and character knowledge. But as a Dungeon Master, you are providing your character and your player with the same knowledge, which is a difficult thing to I guess, indulge, because ultimately, your player and your character are a reflection of each other. So it is up to the player to decide what his character tells the other characters. Now, I will say, as a player, I fully embody the idea that a player should reveal to other players what his intentions, her intentions, his ultimate goal is, because it's important for the players to understand what that means. But as a character, they might be different.
I followed that.
And that lies like the role play discussion, right? As you guys have alluded to, as a role play game, the game is a shared story. That is what it's ultimately about, is a shared story. The Dungeon Master, the players, the characters, we all experience and understand this world together. But if your players withhold knowledge about a character within each other, that's fine. But if your players withhold knowledge within each other, then the story collapses and the characters make choices that are less advantageous to what the true goal is and what the true story might be. And ultimately, it detracts from the true meaning of the story because your players start resenting each other and they start deciding, you know what, fuck this guy. You know what, he was evil the whole time. I hate this guy, whatever, I'm done. And your characters reflect that because the players feel differently. So as a dungeon master, you need to toe that line differently. You need to toe that line carefully.
I'm going to jump in. I don't like the idea of there being a true story or a true ending. I think a D&D game is so entirely cooperative. It's a joint venture between a number of people that no one individual knows how it's supposed to turn out. And I think as long as everyone at the table can approach it from the aspect of, hey, here's this thing we're setting out to do, but ultimately all we want to do is have fun. And we might have some sort of weird betrayal moment when a certain deep gnome happens to withhold information.
Yes,
or
I'm gonna become Strahd. I'm gonna become Strahd.
Lord, simmer down. If that happens, it's okay, and people aren't going to be mad. I think it's important to just set that expectation up front. Are we over?
Just about, yeah.
All right. So real quick for you guys, I'm Eric McLean. You can find me on Facebook as Eric McLean, McLain. You can also email me at ericinMcLean.com, McLain. This is Justin Johnson.
I have cards if you want to chat later.
Come up and get his cards. He's radiofreegamer@gmail.com. We are widely available as resources and/or dungeon masters or just pals to hang out with. So please join us. We love to play Dungeons and Dragons. We love to play tabletop games. It's all about it. So yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thank you
guys.
all. Yeah.